Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome again to the poem of the day. This is for today, Friday, August 22nd, 2025. I'm sorry, 2025. Um, I'm tired, and I think that's why I got the year wrong. I'm also coming to you a little bit later today than usual. Been a little bit busy this week getting back to school, but everything has been really lovely and warm, and it's been great to be back. And I love the business of teaching. I love feeling at the end of the day that you have spent a lot of time thinking and helping other people think and guiding them towards more critical thought and clearer expressions of their own thoughts and ideas onto paper and introducing them to interesting and complex literature that they might not encounter on their own. One piece of interesting and complex literature that I did not encounter on my own was Emily Dickinson poetry when I was in high school. It was a part of an American literature single semester elective course I took my senior year with a really wonderful teacher. And the poem that she gave us from Emily Dickinson, because it was a survey course and it was one semester, we had to move pretty quickly. So I seem to recall we did Dickinson in like a day or something like that. But the poem that she gave us, which still remains my favorite Emily Dickinson poem, is known as 479, or Because I Could Not Stop for Death. And when I think of Emily Dickinson, this for me is her, of the ones I've read, like her greatest hit and the one that is most emblematic of her style and her concerns. So I'm going to read it and give you some very brief thoughts and things that I notice and that I appreciate about the poem. But as per usual, I will not do the poem justice in this short video, and I'll leave many things unsaid and unexplored that I hope perhaps your mind wanders to. So this poem comes from 1862, and it is number 479 by Emily Dickinson, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school, where children strove at recess, in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer, my gown, my tippet, only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice, and the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. All right. So what first caught me about this poem when I was a young person was the way that, as I spoke of previously in the videos, there's a ballad formed towards the metric structure despite it not being a ballad itself. And what that means is there are 6 quatrains in this, so there's 24 lines, and off the bat, Dickinson establishes that 4/3 meter scheme. And what I mean by that is with iambs, right? So we have iambic tetrameter in lines 1 and 3 of the first quatrain, and then iambic trimeter in lines 2 and 4. So 8 beats and then 6 beats. And iambs, so it's a unstressed and then a stressed syllable. And so if I were to read it, I don't think this is the way to read it, but if I were to read it to emphasize that metric structure, it would sound something like this. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. with that alternating rhyme scheme in lines 2 and 4, and then that tetrameter, trimeter, it really sounds upbeat and joyful, almost a skipping or truly almost like a horse galloping. And I was initially struck when I was younger by what seemed like this disparity or this conflict and tension between the form and the content, that the content is talking about living your life in such a way that you are busy and toiling and ignoring the fact that you're mortal, but then that death catches up for you. In this case, death stops for you. And that kind of ironic use of the word kindly there, I thought gave this a really sinister tone at the beginning. Death arriving in this carriage, and yet the carriage also holding an immortality in it. So death arriving is promising that you are about to end your earthly life, but it's headed towards an immortality. And it's one that in this case is not specified as being heaven or hell, but almost being this, or at least being open to possibly being a pagan underworld there. So just her tone in this poem and her approach to talking about rather morose subjects shifts from, I think, being ironic to being somewhat wistful in the next two stanzas, where it focuses on putting aside the labor and the leisure as death knows no haste, and then passing by the school and seeing fields of grain in the setting sun, which are kind of symbols of looking back, I think, on one's life. Perhaps she's recalling herself being a school child running around, and remembering these rather picaresque images of the gazing grain. Setting sun also functions as a symbol of, the end of the day, or the light going out, the end of one's life there. On kind of a nice stylistic note there, while there isn't end rhyme, there is this interesting internal rhyme between in the ring, we pass the fields of gazing grain, we pass the setting sun, which I think is kind of interesting. She doesn't use those as end rhymes, but places them right before the end as an internal rhyme. And then what I think is the most fascinating to me part of this poem is that rhythm and metrical structure I discussed at the beginning is turned. There's a volta here, where the speaker goes from that kind of wistful remembrance towards something darker and colder and chiller. The speaker feels something cold within themselves as they're beginning to come to a passive acceptance of death. And so as the speaker's tone changes, so too does that metrical structure. We then go, instead of going 4-3-4-3, we go for a quatrain to 3-4-3-4. So iambic trimeter, then iambic tetrameter. And you can hear it here right at the or. So to begin with the previous stanza, we passed the setting sun, and then, or rather, he passed us. And that line is caesured right between those three beats on either side. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. And then within that stanza, it turns back again, which I think is really a skillful and pretty genius move there, so that the poem is almost mirrored stylistically on both sides of the exact midpoint of it. So then we look towards the final quatrain, and the speaker brings us into the present then. I think it's easy for me to lose that the first 5 quatrains, because they're so rich in vivid imagery, that they're being told in past tense and not in the present. And we're brought into the present here, where it says, since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. So the speaker is speaking from that position of the afterlife, and the rest of this poem then is being revealed as having been a remembrance or a reflection of that day which they died, many centuries later, but time is out of joint in this, which kind of lends itself towards a little bit more of a Christian reading where um, the afterlife exists outside of temporality or exists outside of time. And yet she does leave us that the horses' heads were turned toward eternity. Um, and it's in still, I think, a place of transit or a place of becoming. She doesn't exactly say that they reached that, so she could be sitting in a sort of waiting period, like a purgatory or a limbo, as she's speaking this poem. I love this poem because the harder you press on it, the more it reveals things that seem to be contradictory or seem to be have tension within them. And those tensions, again, between something like the tone of it and the content of what it depicts, I think, isn't ironic in the traditional sense, but makes the reader really try to identify what's going on beneath just the surface of voice here. And then that can get us to observations about experiments with form and structure that Dickinson's doing, which is easy to miss because her poems are often formally very similar. You can kind of look at one just being posted on a wall and know that that would be an Emily Dickinson poem just because of the way that it's laid out. I hope you liked this poem as well. As I said, there's many more things that we could say about it, but I'm already coming up on 12 minutes. And this will end our Emily Dickinson series for this week. So we'll return to her at some point later in the Poem of the Day series. But I think looking at those 5 together was a useful and interesting kind of first step or foray into her rather extensive catalog. If you recall, I said she had something like 1,800 poems, most of which were published after she died. And so we've only read 5, and there's many more to take a look at later. Have a great weekend. Hopefully you'll join us again tomorrow, but have a restful weekend and have a peaceful rest of your day.